Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Soldiers of Cinema podcast. I'm Clark Coffey, and with me, as always, is the super groovy Cullen McFader.
I thought you were waiting for me there for a second. I was going to say something.
No, I should do some preparation, aside from watching the film that we're going to be covering today. I should have I feel like I need to give some extra time to come up with some really, really worthy descriptors, adjectives for you, now that this has become a thing.
We can say, give us 18 million descriptors for other podcast hosts, and then we can just go down the list. We'll never run out.
So you're suggesting I should just use AI to come up with content here on our podcast? I don't know. I mean, maybe we could just we could ask AI to create a film for us, and then we could ask the same AI to create a podcast for us discussing the film that it created, and then we just sit back and do nothing.
And we'd get jobs at Sony or something. Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure that's, of course, easy. It's easy, no problem. Well, anyway, I guess because, in the past, it had kind of become this running meme, but maybe I'm pushing it now. I don't know.
No, I think we're into it. I think we've got to double down.
Is it okay? We double down? Okay.
Yeah,
all right. Yeah. Fair. I mean, I feel like groovy because it's when I see the stash, I think groovy. It takes me back to the 70s, which I know you didn't live through, and frankly, really neither did I. I was, 4 years old by the time I was out of the 70s, so I really don't remember any of it. But I feel like, the stash reminds me of the 70s, which takes me to groovy, and then I just didn't want it to be groovy Cullen McFader because I feel like you're super as well. So there you have it.
It's a little Starsky and Hutch kind of thing. Right?
You know what? I could see you in like a reboot of that, dude. I could totally see that. Anyway, sorry, listeners, for it taking so long just to get to the start of of the real meat of our podcast, which is our discussion of my selection for the week, The New World, Terrence Malick's 2005 film.
Curious man, Smith. What is it that you're looking for?
I've always believed that something good was in store for me. Destiny all my own.
Lips.
What is beyond the world?
Did you bring any food?
We must live in peace with these people. Our survival depends upon it.
Had she not fed us, we would have starved.
Where you went to go? I beg you, let not America go wrong in her first hour.
We could leave this place together.
I picked this because I know Cullen's a huge fan of Mr. Malick and his work. And I also picked it because I had not seen this film and it, maybe since its like release on home video. So we can kind of jump in then to the personal experiences. And, let me start with mine, since I'm already grooving in that direction, right? Speaking of groove, speaking of groovy. So, way back when this film was released, I didn't go see it in the theater, and I have no recollection as to why, and who knows? I don't know. I just didn't go see it. Um, and I think, to be frank, at the time, my level of exposure to Malick was maybe The Thin Red Line, and that was it. And I really didn't have any kind of strong connection or association with him as a director. And so when this film was released, it didn't like jump out at me, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But so then when it was released on home video, I still didn't even run out and go grab it. Actually, one of my roommates at the time, I had just moved to Southern California, and I lived in a house with a couple roommates. And it was actually one of my roommates who went out and rented it. And I mean, I had no part in the selection of the film or anything at all. And so, he was like, "Oh, hey, I rented this movie. You guys want to watch it with me?" And I'm like, "Okay, sure, why not?" And so it was kind of one of those experiences where it's like you have no expectations. I didn't even know what the movie was. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
He's like, "Oh, we're gonna watch The New World." I'm like, "Okay, sure, whatever." And I had a really interesting experience with the film. So first of all, I was just totally mesmerized by the film. It was like really a viewing experience that stands out in my memory of watching films. So kudos. I don't want to like just say somebody's name who like doesn't necessarily maybe want to be public. I don't know, but roommate, you know who you are. Thank you so much for exposing me to this film. You have great taste, sir. So thank you. Shout out to Rumi. He's a good dude. But so check this out. This is also kind of funny. So here's it's like this is kind of interesting to me. Maybe this will be boring, but okay. So my roommate, he bought we live in this crappy house, right? It's a crappy old house, and he bought this. You remember those huge like rear projection TVs like Mitsubishi used to make? And they're 480, but it was like 60 inches or something, which would have been huge for back then. So it's like this large but ridiculously crappy image quality.
And they
were
like
4.3
feet deep.
Yeah, it's like 4.3, 480i. It's like that, and every little ounce of resolution is stretched across this huge screen. So it's like the scan lines are just like an inch, like you know what I mean. And he also had grabbed this like used like AV AV receiver from somewhere, Craigslist or something, right? And so picture quality not great. And the sound was like super weird. You know how sometimes if you have like a 5.1 or some kind of surround mixed and it's not like set correctly, or you don't have the right speaker set up or something, and it can be like hard to like the dialogue gets lost in the mix or something. I don't know if you've ever experienced that.
Yeah, it's like it's condensing the 5 into 2 or something.
Something super weird. Hey, something super weird. And so I'm watching the film, and I could not hardly understand any of the dialogue, but especially the narration. The way the narration is kind of laid into the mix, and the way the setup was, I would just grab like words here and there of the narration. I couldn't make it out. And normally I'd be like, whoa, we got to change this. Like, hey, I can't, I'm missing something here in the film. This is unacceptable. But for whatever reason, I didn't. And I think it was because it just like somehow even added something more to the film. It made it even like more of this like of a mystical experience almost. So I just focused on the images, and it almost played for me almost like a silent film, or at least like a film without dialogue. And it was just an extraordinary experience. It left a huge impression on me. And I think it was the first, I don't know, it was Malick's style of filmmaking was something that I hadn't really experienced at that point in my life, and it just blew me away. I mean so from an emotional perspective, before we get into the technical stuff, it was extremely moving, and it was really kind of broadened my expanses on, especially because this is a studio film. It's like Christian Bale, it's Colin Farrell. It's like, whoa, it feels like it's going to be this blockbuster type movie, right? You think it's going to be, some kind of epic adventure, or something
like a live
this.
Action Pocahontas.
Yeah, or that, yeah, whatever. But of course, it's not even remotely close to that. And it really does kind of almost veer into like an experimental film, which is what all of his films after this one have been kind of labeled by the press, which is interesting. So that's my personal experience. It was, before we get, like I said, just technical, just speaking from an emotional perspective, I was just blown away by it. Emotionally, just found it extraordinary. So yeah, there you go. There's my personal experience with the film. What about you?
Yeah, I as you mentioned earlier, like I'm a big fan of Malick. He's arguably my favorite director, or if not up there.
Yeah.
And I like this movie in particular as well would be one of, definitely one. I love all of his movies. There's not really any that I don't like, so it's kind of a fool's errand of me to even try and pick out which one would be my favorite.
To.
But I think
we're not going to push you to.
Yeah, thank you, I appreciate it. But I think that if I, in terms of the ones that I've seen the most or connect with the most on sort of like that emotional level, it definitely would be The Thin Red Line, this, and Tree of Life. That kind of, which he did all in a row.
Yeah.
I think that we did The Thin Red Line. I was thinking about it that when we reviewed that movie would be, God, it was like 4 years ago now. It was 2020, and so when we
chose this in 4 years ago? Thin Red Line, we did
Thin
4
Red Line.
years ago?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so I was thinking about it because I was like, it's funny because we've only done one other Malick movie, even though he's one of my favorites. I've always kind of been hesitant to choose another one because I'm like, I don't want to do a repeat so quick. But then I was like, oh wait, it's been 4 years.
Yeah.
And so I think that this is
you were in middle school when we did that one. No.
Exactly. Yeah. Now I'm in high school. I'm almost a senior. But I think that this is really interesting because it's almost like a evolution of that into something that I think a lot of people know Malick as, where there's this weird thing where it's like, back in the 70s, his movies were pretty formalistic. He had a lot of the tendencies of like the narration and things like that, but Badlands is a pretty straightforward story. Even Days of Heaven, you're getting into that kind of meandering monologue thing. But I remember watching those and sort of thinking, okay, this is still pretty formal. Like it's still shot like pretty there's
a standard narrative that you can kind of as an audience member grab onto. Yeah, and it doesn't feel too like you don't feel too unmoored as like a viewer in those earlier films.
And so then when I watched, this and The Thin Red Line and Tree of Life, I think would have been the first one of the three that I saw. It's interesting. Like I think one of the things that really sparked an interest in me was just the fact that you kind of like you said, where it's like this big studio picture, you've got this big budget, you've got these A-list stars,
right,
in what kind of amounts to a challenging of blockbuster or big budget filmmaking in that sense. Not that this is a blockbuster, but
no,
you just don't see formalistic challenges like in the way that Malick does them here, in terms of just kind of throwing out narrative convention. And I remember actually quite recently I was teaching a class to like a film class, and I showed moments from a bunch of Malick's films to kind of express this idea of like, filmmaking through feeling and emotion as opposed to plot and writing and getting things in the audience's head via words and specific action. And I remember kind of my prelude to showing them Malick clips was sort of saying like, don't try and work out what is going on in each scene from a literal sense. just look at the images and listen to the sounds and listen to the words that the characters are speaking and feel something. And whatever you are feeling from those words and sounds and things like that is likely right. Like you're likely on a very basic emotional level in the right place. Because I think that that's the challenge I think a lot of people have with getting it. And I certainly felt that getting into Malick, even though I always really liked him, it was a challenge to get emotionally connected for me for a while because of the fact that I think I was looking too specifically at like, okay, well, what's this character doing in this scene? Why does this matter?
Interesting.
Why? And so I found that, you know, as I got older and as I rewatched a lot of his movies and things like that, especially here, especially with the extended cut here too, because there's even more meandering, so to say, in this movie of the characters. And I think I sort of started to look at them a different way and realize that, okay, whatever I'm just feeling is right. I don't have to understand and it kind of goes back to what you were saying about how like the dialogue wasn't audible and that the narration wasn't audible, and yet you still had an experience with the movie. And it's like, okay, yeah, because that's not really the point.
I mean, arguably a better experience, interestingly enough. So I want to pause you here, because I don't want to lose this before we start, you know, really getting into the nitty gritty of it. So just in case I missed it, so when did you see this film, roughly ish? I
honestly don't remember. I think it was probably around.
So you don't have like a solid recollection of your first viewing.
I remember seeing, like, I do remember my feelings seeing it the first time. It was probably when I was in like grade 11 or grade 12. So,
okay. And you'd been, and you said you were familiar with Malick and his work.
Yeah. So
by the time you saw this,
Tree of Life, I'd seen when I was much younger. I saw Tree of Life around the time of release.
Okay, and that then, was your first Malick film.
Yeah. And then this one, I remember, like, I think that it was just seeing it. I do remember coming away feeling like positive. You know, I really
so you don't have like a strong recollection of it, and so I'm curious then. So coming back to it now, obviously, so it's almost feels like a little bit of full circle for you in a way, because it sounds like you don't have a strong recollection of having first seen it. You were younger. But you've become a fan of Malick's. You've seen, you know, I'm assuming all or most of his films at this point. Mm-hmm. So what was your experience this time? I mean, just emotionally, before we get into a technical, because I kind of always like to start from that point where it's like, hey, we're just like we're just an audience first, right?
Mm-hmm. No, I felt, I mean, it's funny to me to be so, like, I was completely hypnotized, so to say. Like, I find that that's what this, in kind of very similar circumstances as like Koyaanisqatsi, which of course we did last week.
I thought of that too. Yes.
You get hypnotized by, you know, I think that's where Malick is so talented, is that he has this ability to have scenes where seemingly nothing is occurring and yet you are brought in. So I think emotionally for me watching it, I was like, you know, unsurprisingly, it wasn't a shock because of course I've seen this movie since as well. And but I think that never an urgency to like look away from the screen. In fact, at one point when I can't remember what I had to get up, I think I was just like refilling my water or something. And sometimes if I'm watching a movie and I'm not, you know, I just am literally walking 3 feet sideways and filling it up from the sink, I paused this because I was like, I don't want to miss a frame of the movie. So which is weird for a movie that it's not like you've got to keep up with a bunch of convoluting twists and turns.
Right.
And, you know, keep track of all these. Yeah. And yet I think that that's the thing, is like it brings you into this very immersive kind of audio visual experience, this sort of soundscape, and if you will. And of course, you know, visual.
Right. Sure.
The visuals are incredible. But, and I think that that's, if anything, each time I've watched this movie, that's just gotten more certain for me that I've, you know, that I can see it less as a movie that I'm sitting down and watching, and more as something that you kind of like sit down and fall into and just get sucked in for. I mean, the extended cut is long too.
It is, and just to clarify too, so we will be talking about the extended cut of this film for the duration of this conversation. It's the cut that both of us watched in preparation for this discussion. So just to kind of clarify that, Although, I mean, I don't think our discussion would be terribly different if we were discussing another cut, but just for clarification for everybody. I mean, I'm curious, just speaking emotionally, because of Malick's films, of all the films I've seen, and with this one as well, there, as I try to kind of find an articulation for the emotions that this film brings up in me when I'm watching it. I mean, there's an interesting like melancholy. There's an interesting kind of it's almost like uh, it's it's right. There's a beauty, but there's kind of like this undercutting melancholy. It's almost like the fleeting nature of things kind of gives it their beauty. There's kind of I mean, I don't know, it's going to be super cheesy, but there's almost like this existential kind of experience watching these films that you don't often have watching, especially a more traditionally narrative film. Certainly not from watching a Marvel flick.
Yeah,
But
well,
I mean, do you get a sense of this kind of this
totally.
melancholy,
Yeah, I mean,
this theme but it's almost like the beauty is kind of painful. I don't know. I don't know. Does that resonate with you at all, or am I just making stuff
I think
up?
Malick has like a super specific point of view in all of his movies, and he's
Right.
super in touch with kind of nature and humanity's relationship with nature. And I think similarly to The Thin Red Line, where The Thin Red Line is not really a war movie. It's a movie about humanity that just happens to use a story in war to express those feelings.
Sure.
And this is a movie that takes place during colonial times, and yet the movie is not really specifically about colonialism. It's more about the relationship of man and nature. And I totally get what you mean in terms of this melancholy, where I think that especially the latter half of the film, when Jamestown is actually kind of being established and they're kind of through those rough winters, and there's actually a level of like a colony that's self-sufficient. It really starts to get very melancholic. There's a point where you're constantly seeing back to the indigenous people who at the beginning of the film were living that life completely as they were. And yet now you see them farming and trading and selling furs to the settlers, and even living in houses in some instances, as opposed to a much more kind of bare bones way of living that they would have lived before the settlers. And it does feel very melancholic, because I think Malick's point of view here is that you're like almost like when you rip yourself out of nature and you kind of build this disconnect between you and nature, as the European settlers have, you die. Like you can't live like that. Like you lose your soul in this sense. And so it is really melancholic, like you said, to see. You don't really know why it's sad, because it's like these characters haven't necessarily literally died when they are now living in houses and trading with and living a more, so to say, European style of living. And yet in the language of the monologues, in the framing of the images, and the way that the film kind of approaches that at that point and changes this tone, you get this sense that something's missing. And we get these constant monologues at that point about like, I feel like I'm disconnected. I feel like I've betrayed my mother. I feel like, and so there's this really, really profound switch in that it's super subtle. I think, another filmmaker approaching this would likely have done it much more upfront and in your face, where it's like, oh, I need to get back out into the woods and see, nature again. And yet this one, it's hard because the characters don't themselves understand it. And so I think it's trying to explore that sort of sense, which is, the definition of melancholy is a feeling of sadness without really being able to identify the source. And I think that there is absolutely this incredible sense of, like, it's looking at this bigger picture. It's using this story of
it's interesting
Jonestown, or Jamestown, not Jonestown.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me. I mean, and again, like I often do, I'm kind of finding my way in an articulation of feelings, live in the moment. So forgive me, everyone, if if I kind of stumble through that a little bit. It's just I guess, the nature of me and how I work. But I mean, it's interesting. I think, even more specifically, it's his use of beauty, of visual, of aesthetic awe to illustrate that uh, that growing disconnect. You know, I just find it interesting. In a particular way that he does it. I mean, just I kind of jump around here, some things that kind of stood out to me. I think there was like a couple, and like I said, this is the first time that I really actually heard the monologue, or no, sorry, the narration. I didn't really have the narration in my first viewing experience because just again the way it's kind of laid in the mix, it was mostly not understandable to me the first, when I first watched this film so many years ago. This time I listened to it with headphones on, so the kind of the surround sound mix thing was not an issue, and it was, boom, being pumped right into my ear. So, everything that was said in the film I understood. There's some like really interesting contrasts, so, with the narration and what's happening in the film. It's kind of like when Colin Farrell's character, when John Smith, he's narrating and they're kind of coming into the land, and he's, is this just, I forget exactly, I can't quote it exactly, but there's almost this very strong contrast or irony between what he's saying about, free men being able to make their way, and that this land is rich and theirs for the taking, kind of. Well, of course, we have the hindsight of knowing exactly what happened to the indigenous people who lived here, right? And it's kind of this irony of like him seeing it as this wonderful blessing. If you work hard, you'll be this, your stature will be recognized, or all of these kind of things. Well, of course, we know what the cost of that ended up being for the people who already were living on that land, right? I don't think that's accidental. There's other interesting ironies between the narration and what's happening on screen. I if you remember this, I feel like, again, it's hard to kind of place in the quote unquote story where this happens, because the film is so much not about story, but it's like, I think it's when maybe it was their first journey when they travel upriver and they go to the quote unquote kings, to have some dialogue with the king. Right. And I feel, and I can't even remember the words, but I feel like it's like the Europeans are just like grabbing stuff like off of the tribe. Like there's leaves drying or there's food or something, and they're just like taking it for themselves. And the narration is, I wish I could remember. I should have written it down exactly. But I guess my point is there's like these really interesting, almost humorous ironies, except that they're kind of, they're illustrating pretty negative things, but they're almost strangely humorous in the how matter of factly the contrast are laid out, right? Just how the irony is just so bold in a couple spaces there. I don't know if you felt any of that, but I guess in a similar way that the contrast or almost the visual irony of the beauty, but what happens in the story, which is a lot of what you described, right? It's kind of illustrating a lot of different things, but the one that you specifically mentioned about humans' growing disconnection to nature, right? And there's a lot of melancholy and sadness there, and the conflict between these two groups of people. And of course, again, having the knowledge of history that we know now and what that ended up turning into, right? Basically a genocide, ultimately.
Yeah.
And of course, Malick would have known this as well. I mean, he's obviously that would be in his mind, I would assume, as well as an artist. So I don't know where I'm quite going with this. Maybe you can help me articulate it more clearly. But I guess I just really noticed that contrast is very interesting to me and used to great effect in this film.
Well, I think that the thing that interests me too, and I think something that I got very strongly this time was, and again, like you said, forgive me if I'm all over the place here, because I'm kind of working this out as I say it.
You know what? No. It's okay. It's like this conversation will be in the style of one of Malick's films, right?
There you go.
It's like a collage. It's like a collage of, just imagine this as like a collage of, conflicting and contrasting comments that kind of coalesce into you just got to buy a ticket, man, and take the ride and just feel it. You don't try to understand it analytically. Just go with the flow.
Just feel what we're saying. Yeah. But no, I think that it's interesting because there's this kind of, especially through history, there has been this overarching kind of dogma that the European settlers showed up, and that there were these, Stone Age people that were civilized, right? And that's kind of the
narrative for a while. Not, yes, I think it's been a long time since that's been, kind of accepted. But for a period of time, yes.
In this film, that's what they're
that's what the
assuming,
Europeans
right?
at that time felt. That's what they felt. It would have been, these are primitives. They, and we're, part of that kind of, I guess, like rationalization for taking, somebody else's land and home, is that, okay, we're going to civilize you, and, you don't know Christianity? Well, boy, we're here to introduce that to you as well. So I think that was the mindset of that era for sure.
Or even like, you don't know how to build a wall, like, a defensive fort. And it's this interesting thing, because I think especially so in the last 30 years, as there used to be in kind of academic circles, this question of like, well, okay, well, why was, despite the fact that they were around for as long as we were, why was European culture technology so much more advanced than the indigenous people in the Americas, which across the board, is not even that true. There were cities especially in Mesoamerica. But I think the thing is that this is where Malick, I think, is really brilliant in this film, and what he's doing is that he's showing that just because technology may be more advanced, what does that mean about life and feeling? How does that make it superior? Because then you get to London near the end of the film, and everything's gray, and the people are just, there's where is the life and the energy there, and you meet these kings, the king and the queen, in this ornate hall, and yet it feels so sterile and so dead. And then you have that wonderful sequence where they're walking around those manicured gardens, and the trees are perfectly formed and shaped, and it's like, it just feels completely lifeless. And so I think what he does here, which I think is really brilliant, is just that he's challenging this idea of this like European enlightenment. And it's like, enlightenment for what sake? Progress for what sake? Progress in air quotes, because it seems like, on a large scale, that these, like you said, what did it lead to other than genocide, really? And why is it that there's this understanding or this belief that technological advancement will necessitate happier lives or more fulfilled lives? And I think that that's really what we're looking at here in this grand sense. Even when you get to the palace in London, for example, and there's this incredible architecture, it kind of you like, that's one of those things that if you're on vacation and you're in one of these old cities and stuff like that, you're kind of like, oh wow, this architecture is incredible. But after so long of looking at the trees and the meadows and the marshes and the rivers, it almost pales in comparison to, like, this beautiful architecture pales in comparison to the natural beauty of this. And I think that he's very intentionally shooting this way. He's very intentionally showing the natural beauty as beautiful, because of course there are certainly natural places that are gray and drab and stuff in the world. And yet I think that it's about just this feeling of being alive and being connected, and that's kind of what I think got the most.
And
out
that's
of
what
this
you
time.
Yeah, something else I think I want to add to that, because I think one of the wonderful things about Malick's films and the New World, of course, as well, um, is that he really invites you as the viewer to bring yourself to the film, and he gives so much space for interpretation, for active interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
And I really enjoy that about his films. And I think you could likely watch this film numerous times, and each time you watch it, you could come away with something different, being, kind of your prominent takeaway, so to speak, from that, from the film, from that viewing. And certainly, I think if you sat down 100 people and they watched this film and you asked them what it was about, or what statement is Malick making, what do you think his perspective is? I mean, there would be some consistencies, but I think there'd be a lot of different answers too.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate that about this film. Even though, and even though you say, well, hey, it's very clear that Malick is kind of using these two groups of people to contrast, one group being closer to nature and one group being kind of more leaning into technology and being somehow more removed or distant from nature. And I think that certainly you could make a strong argument for that, and you list some, different ways that you feel like Malick has kind of shot and illustrated that. I find it, in this viewing, one of the things that stood out to me so much was this almost Romeo and Juliet romance. And I hadn't
Mm-hmm.
really noticed how almost kind of Romeo and Juliet it is in a way, right? It's kind of like these star-crossed lovers, but they come from different groups and they can never be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Basically. Yeah. It's so, first of all, I just want to say that the way that Malick has shot, like the first half of this film is almost kind of like a falling in love story, basically.
Yes.
And I think that's where you say, and then kind of like once John Smith leaves, it kind of becomes much more melancholy.
Mm-hmm.
Once that relationship is no longer the focus of the film.
For
And
both characters as well, like
for both
yeah.
characters, yes. And we don't see Colin Farrell's John Smith as much. We focus on, I think it's Koryanka Kilcher. I hope I pronounced that
Mm-hmm.
correctly. If not, I apologize. Focus on her and her kind of descent into melancholy and almost, I don't know, say insanity, but her descent into a separation or disassociation, right? Where she's an
Mm-hmm.
alien, a stranger in a strange land. She's separated from her tribe. She's been given away, and she has no home here in this strange place, right? And she wishes for death, even. But I want to go back to the first half real quickly, because it's one of the things that struck me the first time, and it struck me again this time, is that it might be one of the most beautifully conceived falling in love stories in cinema that I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
Just capturing the emotion of what it's like to fall in love, and bringing that to us in such a beautifully abstract but also surprisingly specific way is just really extraordinary. I mean, it's like, it always kind of leaves me at a loss, but I don't know if that's, but so that Romeo and Juliet kind of storyline almost stood out more to me in this viewing, and I kind of focused a little bit more on that. But I think he uses that relationship really beautifully, that, like, it's almost like we can come close, right? You can kind of like, you can come close to kind of fully empathizing with a different way of existence, but ultimately we're kind of still bound by our fates, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're kind of still bound by where you grew up and how you grew up and the culture in which you grew up, and you can't really ever leave that. Ultimately, no, neither of the two of them can. And maybe you can go so far as to never be able to be kind of come back to your own culture, but you also can never really be accepted by this new culture. And ultimately, what happens to the character who's in that situation in this film is that she dies.
Yeah, now you're an outsider also to your original culture as well,
You're
because yeah.
Well, and it's interesting too, because when she dies, it isn't some melodramatic, horrible thing. she's
It's actually quite
reborn.
beautiful.
Yeah, she's reborn at the end of the film.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that he films that back where she is back in nature and clearly ecstatic, doing cartwheels and dancing and twirling, but she's in the European dress. And of course, we end on this extraordinarily beautiful shot up at the trees, and it's cut right after the bird leaves the tree, and boom, we're in credits. So
well, I mean, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. So I don't know. So I feel like that really stood out to me personally, more than kind of what seems to have stood out maybe more prominently to you, which is like, great, that's awesome. I feel like that's a sign of a really great work of art, is that there can be so many interesting and deep interpretations. But I don't know. So that just stood out to me, and I was curious, like, what your feelings or thoughts were on that aspect of the film, their relationship.
Well, it's interesting too, though, because I think that this story of Pocahontas and John Smith has been it's been told so many times, and this is one of, I think, I've seen several adaptations. Of course, haven't seen every adaptation, but this has got to be the only one I've ever seen that has truly, like, it's not overindulgent in its depiction of these things. It only kind of, it explores the emotional truth better than anything else. I think the reason for that is because it's very honest with itself about, I noticed in the behind the scenes special features, they talk specifically about avoiding the trope of the, like, so-called noble savage, where it's like, okay, you get there and that these people living with the land are so much more like gracious and noble.
Yeah.
And, like, no, they have their problems, and the Europeans have their problems. And because of that subtlety, you kind of get this very honest, not dour, but again, I'm going to go back to Koyaanisqatsi in this way, where it's like, it's not cynical about it. It's more expressive about the flaws of humanity and how we are susceptible to so many different errors. And yet that's what kind of makes us human. And that also is what makes us, if anything, more a part of that nature. Even at the end, I think when Smith and Pocahontas meet up in England and they're having their conversation, and it's like, those times that we spent together it's the only truth. And you can take that so many different ways. You can take that as, again, you can take that in this sort of nature-based way that I sort of read it as, but you can also take that as like the truth of our the emotional truth of our relationship, and that it's like, what does he mean by the only truth? Well, perhaps he's saying that it's irreplaceable, that we can try and get that back, but that was kind of, those circumstances were so specific and so perfect for us. And so there's this layer of tragedy to it, but it's beautiful tragedy. It's this really, I think, you're not, again, you've mentioned Romeo and Juliet, and there's so many great adaptations of that as well. And I find almost the worst adaptations of Romeo and Juliet are the ones that get so melancholic and so downtrodden with the ending, rather than this really beautiful exploration of this relationship. And so I think when, I think arguably the most beautiful point in the film is as she dies, and she describes to Christian Bale's character, John Rolfe, I believe his name is. Lots of Johns in this movie.
Yeah.
And she says, essentially, she like completely accepts it. Like, you've got this moment of, like you said, rebirth, where throughout the majority of the final half of the movie, you can tell that she is dying. If not physically, emotionally, she's dying. She's getting depressed, and she's unused to where this world that she's now thrust into. And yet you have this renaissance right before she dies of, perhaps this all was beautiful. Like, perhaps this journey that I went on was the point, and that's what's beautiful about it. And that everyone has to die. We all have to die, and that she goes completely with accepting that fate, and almost in that returns to what she found the most beautiful about life. And like you said, that you end on this beautiful shot of the trees and the bird flying off. And I think that to me is the best kind of, rounding out of this story that I've seen, and that's why I kind of say that it's I think if anything the perfect adaptation of that story, because it is so subtle and it is so complicated, even though it's not a complicated plot, so to say. It's incredibly complex emotionally. That doesn't mean that's not clear. That doesn't mean that it's not it's difficult to understand, but it's complicated, it's deep, it's got so much richness to the way that it describes these emotions.
It's not complicated in like it's not like like you said, it's not got all of these convoluted plot mechanizations that so many stories have, which I think are just like red herrings for complexity. Like that's just not, for me, it's not interesting. Convoluted plots, over complications, twists at the movies that rely on a twist. I'm not generally captivated by those films. I mean, this film is actually the plot itself is very simple. The things that the concepts or ideas that this film is exploring they're universal, which in one sense makes them simple, but also they're like endlessly deep insofar as that they affect all of us, and they are profoundly impacting on all of our lives. And so so I guess that's just kind of riffing off what you're saying there, is that I mean, I think that this film is speaking to really deep universal truths or aspects of the human condition. And of course, like you said, it's using this historical scenario as just a mechanism for illustrating or discussing or asking questions about those aspects of the human condition. For example, it's not trying in any way, shape, fashion, or form to tell the historically accurate story of John Smith and when he came over and created, that's like, no, it's in Pocahontas, and it's not. I don't think it really cares too much about that at all.
No,
frankly.
No. It's about. I mean, that's the thing about, I think, most of Malick's films, especially ones that are kind of built around a historical event. Like The Thin Red Line. I mean, the book is famously fictional. The book is about the Battle of Guadalcanal, but none of the events in the book are real. It's about a fictional troop of soldiers.
Yeah.
And so I think that when you do that, when you don't worry about it, again, it's kind of funny because it just gets right back to our conversations about Herzog, which is just like truth versus fact, whereas you're getting much more emotional truth out of this.
And a landscape of the soul.
Landscape of the soul, by presenting it this way and by presenting the emotional truth of the events rather than the historical accurate events. And I think Malick is also a really fascinating filmmaker because he's endlessly interested in these characters that are like, I hesitate to say the word fish out of water because it's not that at all. It's more like there's in most, if not all of his movies, there's always one or two characters. And in this one, it actually almost switches from John Smith to Pocahontas when she gets to kind of is taken into the colony.
Yeah.
But there's always this. He loves to have this one character that is seemingly estranged and in touch with something that everyone around them isn't, and comes to this learning and this understanding that that's not a curse. It's kind of, in a sense, a for lack of a better term, a blessing in that way. And in The Thin Red Line, we get that with Fife. I think is it Fife is the main, or Wit or whatever. There's so many different characters in that movie. I can't remember
It's okay. I
but,
wish I could help you,
this,
but we get the idea.
This beautiful ending to that movie where, of course, he just kind of accepts his death as he's seen the world in the most beautiful ways for as it is, and he's had his cup filled, for lack of a better term. And in this, it's kind of the same thing where we have this character on her deathbed, just going with complete peace and harmony, and John Smith as well, kind of accepting that they had what they had, they've experienced those experiences, and that if you try to artificially bring those experiences back and those feelings back, that you're not going to get anywhere. You're not going to find that happiness again. You kind of have to go on to new things. As scary as it can be, you have to kind of venture out into the unknown of those emotions. And I think that's I just think that it's a really universal, like you said, universal way to look at things. I want to talk briefly too about the score of the movie, both James Horner's score and the music that Malick uses in it. And that, I think, one of the things that sucked me into this movie immediately when I first saw it was the use of Wagner. I love Wagner. And especially the prelude, the Das Rheingold prelude, which comes back in three times.
Much to Horner's chagrin, by the way.
Yes, much to James Horner's chagrin. And we'll talk about that a little bit too, because it's actually an interesting kind of technical side of working with them. But you've got the Das Rheingold prelude, which comes in three times, I believe. The movie starts and ends with it, which I think is a beautiful piece of music. I've used it in like a million things of my own. And it just has that feeling of like your brain waking up, like you're like the world turning on and coming to life. And I think that that's so appropriate for this, because it's like, it's enlightenment, not in the sense of like enlightened era. It's enlightenment in this being in touch with kind of this natural, energy. I sound like a voodoo guy or something like that. but this
like a new age. You sound like a new age practitioner. Yes.
But it does give you that kind of sense of feeling as they roll into these marshes and these meadows at the very beginning of the film on their big ships, and that there's like, it truly does capture this feeling of like what it would have been like to land somewhere in this complete unknown, in this and be breaching out into this quite scary but also quite incredible moment in one's life from like an individual perspective. But then, yes, like you mentioned, there's also the James Horner score, which I think is actually really lovely. I have that on my phone as well, on Apple Music or whatever. James Horner famously not very happy with his experience because, of course, as Malick is, chopped up the score and used bits of it in other places, and James Horner kind of said that he
didn't use a lot of his score at all. Yeah,
and he'd written a very specific kind of story with that music, and Malick, of course, as Malick does, used it sparingly and in places where he wanted it. But I actually do like the James Horner score. But it's interesting too, because that kind of, I think, is kind of the recurring theme with working with Malick. Is Christopher Plummer also has a conversation in a roundtable, an actors roundtable, where he describes that he would never work with Malick again because in this film, he would be delivering a monologue and Malick would run off with the camera to go film a bird in a tree or something. And I think that it's funny because you just kind of see this dichotomy of people who really love working with Malick. Like I think Christian Bale, who's worked with him several times, loves it. Colin Farrell says that he speaks about this experience as a really, really wonderful experience. Hans Zimmer, who did the score for The Thin Red Line, speaks, Jesus, what was that? Sorry, positively about it. He speaks very, he talks about how The Thin Red Line was just basically making a tapestry of music for Malick as opposed to making like a structured story with the music. And so I think you just kind of get into this really, again, not only, I think at the beginning I had said that Malick was challenging the conventions of narrative and had challenged the conventions of like studio filmmaking, but you also get that not only on the receiving end of an audience, but on the technical side of making the film, that you are making a movie that is unlike the production on, I think, pretty much anything else. Which I think is really interesting. I mean, like, why feel the need to be so formalistic about it?
I mean, it's especially, now in the almost 20 years since this film's release, we see where cinema has gone since this film has been released. And it's I think we've asked this of several films that we have discussed in our podcast. And, I'll ask it again of this one. I mean, can you really imagine this film having a wide theatrical release in today's day and age? I would posit the hypothesis that it would be very, very unlikely. And frankly, it's even surprising that a studio funded this film's a theatrical release. It's
that's what I was going to say. Even regardless of theatrical release, would this movie even get the funding period to be
would it
made
even get the
in
funding
this
period?
sense.
Of course. Yeah, of course. I mean, it's uh, maybe a 30 million ish budget. I think it made its money back, but it's interesting to note um, that critical reception of the film is not exceedingly high
Hmm.
and is very split. Just kind of going back and looking at like a brief overview of critical response at the time, you have a group of critics just being, just profoundly moved by the film and claiming it to be one of the best of the decade at the time. And then you have other reviewers who were like, what's going on? you know
Hmm. Yeah.
which I can imagine that this would be a divisive film. I can imagine a lot of audiences expecting, especially if they're expecting a traditional like epic narrative, historical epic narrative film, are going to be disappointed.
Hmm.
um
Hmm.
but and I guess it makes sense. I can imagine that that this film would be divisive, but I'm especially interested in those reviews or those critics who seem to get it, who seem to catch that vibe. And I mean, when they, I think you don't see many reviews that are inspired to a level of like poetry. Like if you go and if you read some of the reviews of this film, it's almost like these critics were inspired themselves to to like it, to achieve a poetry of their explanation for why they liked it. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
I get. Do you know what I mean? It's almost like
Yeah.
the experience was so inspiring that the review is clearly inspired when you read it. Because it's elevated even their writing in the review somehow. The experience, which I find fascinating.
Hmm. No, I think that
But
it's yeah. I mean, it definitely, like you said, I understand the level of people not being able, not necessarily not being able to connect with it, but perhaps just it not being their thing.
yeah.
Um, but it's funny because it is just like I think I said this in our Thin Red Line review or conversation where I described that I could watch a like 10-hour cut of this and would be completely happy with that. So it is very much up my alley in that sense.
Well, and again, it's like, I mean, this is the wonder of cinema, right? Is that there's something out there for everyone. I before we kind of wrap up, I kind of want to talk about, and I'm curious. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm curious if you know more about. I mean, about this. When I watch the film, and because I don't, I've not read a lot, or seen a lot of discussion on how Malick works. Actually,
Hmm.
like literally works, how he prepares for a film, how he works actually during production, and how involved he is in the editing. God, I mean, I would imagine. I'm surprised, honestly, that it's not like edited by him. I see here listed there are 4 editors in the
Yes. Yeah.
credits, and so I'm curious, what that means. But it's almost the feeling that I get when I'm watching the film, if I kind of take a step out, right, and kind of, okay, I'm outside of the film, as far as like just looking at it being impacted emotionally, and I'm kind of looking at the mechanics of the film and imagining how it might have been put together. I mean, it almost seems like he has just shot it in a collage kind of way, right? I mean, I can almost imagine him out there like, oh my God, this is beautiful. We need to get let's come over here
Hmm.
and let's get a shot of this lake. Let's get a shot of this tree. Oh, let's, there are often just the shots of characters just looking straight into camera, just these almost look like just stills basically. And, there's all these different pieces, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's almost like as he's like, just whatever kind of comes to him. We've got a script, yes, but and as and it's just, it almost feels like this was built by collage, and then he kind
Hmm.
of, but I may be totally wrong. It's just how it kind of feels, and then it gets into the editing, and it's like, okay, where does this feeling kind of take us? And it's almost, I wonder if he edits almost in the way that we described. You have to kind of watch the film, which is, okay, I'm not worried about literal story. Yes, there has to be some of that, but I'm really worried about emotional impact, and so it's it's just how am I? It's almost like it's this very intuitive sense that I get that he works from. And I don't know, are you, but it almost just gets that feeling that it's like he's just grabbing shots, just things that move him in the moment. This is beautiful, that's beautiful, or this or that. And then he kind of goes back into editing, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna go where this flow where my feelings kind of take me,
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's totally. I mean, I think that from my understanding, is that basically the way that he shoots the film is he has people in character all the time, and he will just approach them, and that's why the set has to be so extensive as well. Like the building of the set was basically authentic.
Yeah, you can't just have like the front built and then nothing behind. Yeah,
so that he could just walk around and find moments, and that every actor would just basically be in character.
Wow.
They would do a scene, then he would move on to something else, while simultaneously having all these choices of where to go.
Yeah.
And then the edit, I'm more familiar with the process on the Thin Red Line, but I would guess that it would be pretty similar to this, because the Thin Red Line also has, I think, 4 or 5 editors.
Okay.
From my understanding, is each editor basically takes a section of film and works on that extensively for the entire process. So they're not actually cutting the whole film. Each editor is just cutting sections.
Okay,
and that way Malick is able to give very specific instructions on what he wants for, and they essentially will cut together without Malick being there, viewing kind of, I guess, work prints for him, and then he will watch those, make suggestions, make cuts and on his own, and kind of change things up, and then we'll go back and let them kind of continue to form it. And so in doing so, it basically allows these different pathways to form with the movie, because there's different perspectives on where it should go and things like that. So then at the end, it's kind of all smoothed out and formed into the final thing. But
interesting.
Yeah, at least that's, I know for sure how he did it on the Thin Red Line. And again, I would guess that would be similar for here, because there are a number of editors. So it's quite interesting. I know that he also likes to basically edit like as long as he, like as close to release as he can.
Yeah,
he's still making, and that's, I think, one of the reasons that the score was chopped up so much, is because that he was making very big changes to things.
Right.
Well, and actually, the one version of this movie I've not seen is the first cut, like the original cut that was released for Oscar contention. Basically, they released it for a 2-week window in like 3 theaters, just so it could get into.
Well, it's in the Criterion collection.
Yes, and so I think I actually
I
might watch that afterwards.
I think that I might as well too. I would be very curious, because I'm pretty sure, I'm certain that, when I originally saw the film, I saw the theatrical cut, that would have been released just on, I guess, DVD back in 2005, and then this time, of course, we watched the extended cut, like we said. So I couldn't, because there was so much time between watching the theatrical cut and this cut, I can't quite put my finger on what those changes were. Although it did seem like I was like, oh, this, I didn't have a recollection of this aspect of the film or something, but really, I couldn't put my finger on it. So I have no idea how this first cut might be different. So I'd be very interested to see that and to see how different it might be.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, and that's one of the fascinating things about making a movie like that is that kind of exploration in using editing as the writing process, and kind of working out so many different things. And it's not about, at least the way I look at it, it's not about the hesitance to make decisions on set, but rather just a different form of that process. And I think I think the reason that I value that a lot is, I think, because people get so stuck into how things are done on film. Like, if you've ever worked on a film set or ever been involved in the production of something,
people get dogmatic. People can get dogmatic.
Yeah, people are like, and oftentimes don't have a better answer as to why things are done, other than that's just how things are done. Yeah. And so I think that having someone challenge that, you're obviously always going to get pushback, and clearly Malick does get a lot of pushback from critics and people that he's worked with alike. And yet you can't really fault him for the quality of the
output,
the pictures that he comes out with, right? So
yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I've not made a narrative film like this, but I have experience with documentary work, and it just, for myself in my own mind, it almost kind of feels like the way that I would work with a documentary, where I would basically set out with a question for myself as opposed to an answer. And you use the production time to explore the question, whatever this, whatever thing I'm curious about. And then when I'm in editing, it's really an exploration of that, and I don't know where it's going to go, at all. I don't have some pre-planned, okay, this is going to be the first act, and here's the second, and then the third. I mean, I might have certain milestones kind of etched out in my, or sketched out in my mind, but really it could go anywhere, and I don't even know where it might go. And so I don't know. As listening to you kind of describe what your awareness is of his process does kind of sound like, oh, that kind of sounds like how I like to work, at least in the documentary space. And
it's fascinating too, because it kind of also goes again to that Herzog level, where like Herzog describes the fact that he doesn't make narrative films and documentaries in any
storyboards are for cowards. Except I totally did like Arnold Schwarzenegger or something instead of, you do a good Herzog. I'm horrible.
Yeah, we could go back. But no, I think that it's really fascinating though to kind of take that out of it and sort of say like, well, I'm not doing this narrative picture like a narrative picture. I'm just doing it in the way that I want to tell a story, and in a similar sense, I'm not doing this documentary like a documentary. I'm doing it to express something, to express a point of view, and however that comes about is how it comes about, and rather than having to divide, make some distinction between the processes of the two. So I think that's really, really neat, and I think it shows itself on the screen in a very unique way. And I love it.
Yeah,
can't say much else other than, I love it.
Yeah, I mean, I figure that's as good a note to end on as any. I do too. I think that the world of cinema is a better place for Malick, and I need to rectify the fact that I have not seen his other films. But that's great. It's like, it's really fun to have, like, my watch list is always just growing. It's like endless, and I guess that's one of the, there won't be enough time in my life to see all the films that I would like to see, but they're on my list. All right. Well, as always, I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I feel like I was a little less articulate in this conversation than I often am, or at least I imagine I am. Maybe I'm maybe I'm never articulate.
We have to feel.
Yeah, and maybe that's just indicative of the nature of this film, that it's, so there you have it. Anyway, I'll look forward to your pick, whatever that might be, for our next episode. And everybody out there listening, we appreciate you. Thanks for doing so. We'll catch you next time.